Hi everyone, welcome to this Q&A podcast. I have Joe from Sentinel Core with us today. Joe is the CGO of Sentinel Core. They provide blockchain and AI solutions from development to cybersecurity. Joe has been in the blockchain space for 13 years and has a wealth of knowledge regarding implementation, best practices across smart contracts, infrastructure. That all is coupled with his AI and machine learning experience for more than 10 years. He has worked with some of the biggest Web3 protocols in the world and additionally has expertise in the cybersecurity space. Today, he will answer some of the most common questions when it comes to tokenization, DeFi from technical perspective. So Joe, to you and our first question. Let's begin with legal and tech alignment. In your opinion, what are the most common mismatches you see between legal design and smart contract implementation?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Arina. Yeah, so from our perspective, I would say the biggest differences are the policies that are typically written, but they're not necessarily enforceable system logic. So, for example, transfer restrictions, investor eligibility, redemption rights, all these type of things are typically documented legally, but they're not necessarily properly reflected on chain. And even if it's not reflected on chain, it's typically addressed later on, which can be a little bit problematic. So ideally, that type of thing needs to be discussed and brought into the architecture very early on, basically.
And in your opinion, at what stage should legal teams and developers start working together to avoid this situation and costly redesigns?
Yeah, straight away. Yeah, you should really have already in mind at least a group of individuals or a team that you want to work with in order to build this from the bat, basically, just to avoid a multitude of issues that can arise later on down the line. Basically, I think straight away, pretty early on, you need to have that in place for sure.
Great. So in the hype of RWA tokenization, what are the key features of smart contract that could support the compliant RWA tokenization?
Yeah, so I think that we probably could discuss standardized tokenized properties on the blockchain a bit later, but typically speaking, some of those methods include transfer restrictions, investor whitelisting, role-based permissions, and then you've got pools and recovery mechanisms, and if applicable, upgradability patterns where appropriate, ensuring that there's a sufficient amount of auditability and strong event logging on your smart contract, basically, and they just basically need to support both the operational security and legal enforceability.
And how do you translate those legal concepts like transfer restrictions or investor eligibility into the actual smart contract logic?
Yeah, good question. So I mentioned a moment ago about some tokenized standards. So there are probably two main ones that are used in the blockchain space for regulated securities. One of them being an ERC 3643, which is widely used. There is another one called ERC 1400, and that's typically more aligned with compliance heavy tokenized projects. So, I'm talking beyond the standardized real world tokenization setup. There is a third method that you could use, but it's a lot of heavy lifting, and it's a manual combination of ERC20, which is the Ethereum standard today, and the NFT contract, which is the ERC 721. It's not something that I advocate for. It's just a lot of heavy lifting, and most likely you're going to introduce more work for yourselves, more work for legal, and potentially it could create some hidden vulnerabilities that the prior two standards don't actually have effectively.
Are those token standards the only available standards at the moment on the market, or are there other smart contract standards that could help with compliance?
Yeah, there are a few. I mean, they're not widely known, put it that way. I typically don't opt in for anything other than the first two I mentioned because they've already been audited. They align with compliance regulatory standards, and they're quite easy to customize. Whereas if you look at some of the other upcoming standards, they are a work in progress. They're not widely used, and I wouldn't typically feel massively confident. I mean, from my perspective, we can work with them, but it's not something that I would advocate for from a development perspective, at least.
So does this mean all those standards and essentially smart contracts have to run on Ethereum blockchain, or are there any alternatives?
No, you can run them on any chain, actually, to be honest with you. The most applicable ones are any EVM compatible chains. So if it's an Ethereum chain, fine. If it's an Avalanche, or if it's a Phantom or an Optimism or an Arbitrum, any EVM compatible chain, or even if it's a if you've got a private blockchain, you create your own private blockchain and it's EVM compatible. There are lots of ways you can do that, and you can deploy these contracts on there and absolutely fine. I don't believe at the moment there probably is a standard for the Solana chain as well, but I don't think it's as heavily audited and it's set up from a regulatory perspective as much as the Ethereum standards, put it that way.
Great, that's very valuable. And how do you implement KYC IML requirements and logic into the smart contracts and into a non-custodial setup?
Yeah, good question. So a lot of the smart contract architecture is enforcement. It's not something that you should solely rely on when it comes to compliance and KYC and things like that, because if you think about it, addresses are identities, but they're not automatically linked to a human being. Let's just say that for argument's sake. So the off-chain logic verifies the individuals, and that takes care of a lot of the AML and the KYC side of things, basically.
Got you. Okay. What about those enforcements that could not be managed on the smart contract level? Is there anything that needs to be handled off-chain, any off-chain dependencies?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, KYC is certainly something that cannot be handled solely on the blockchain. That's what the blockchain's set up for. It adds a degree of anonymity, and so off-chain KYC is 100% mandatory. There's lots of providers. Samsub's a big one, and that is handled off-chain. So when somebody engages with the platform that you've created, it will automatically trigger the KYC off-chain straight away, and it will link that individual to the address of which they have engaged the platform with, basically. And that's how you keep an eye on compliance for identities, at least, anyway. So a lot of the governance is handled off-chain. What's handled on-chain is enforcement of that, and it's just linked, basically.
Got you. Let's talk a bit more about security and risks related to the technology itself. What are the most common security vulnerabilities you see in tokenized projects?
Great question. Yeah, I'm glad you've asked that. So in general, across the blockchain ecosystem, you typically have a top 10 attack or vulnerabilities that exist, and one of them in particular that's still very prevalent, believe it or not, is access control, and not having a relevant access control on your system and your smart contracts. And so, for example, if you've got a function that you've written, a key function to withdraw, I don't know, fees or withdraw rewards from the tokenization project that you're owed. Let's just say you've got into a real world asset tokenization for property and you're owed some dividends from it, and you go to claim those rewards. That particular function is in some instances exposed, and because there's no access control, so it's not like, you, Irina, you're owed the reward, you can go and claim your rewards, and then all of a sudden someone else can hit that button before you and claim your rewards. And so, yeah, that sounds a little bit trivial, but that's a perfect example of a lack of access control, because it's permissionless and it allows anybody to steal your rewards. It can get a little bit more nuanced, but typically speaking, access control is certainly one of them. One of the other issues we have or see is upgradability issues, believe it or not. And so that's quite a complex area to manage as far as smart contracts are concerned, because you engage proxies to do so. Without going into too much of the detail, it's not like you can launch a typical production grade system and then make changes last minute or at some point whilst it's in production. It's not as simple as that with smart contracts. You need to have the relevant upgradable patterns in place, and a lot of instances we see is pretty much the opposite of that, where they just don't understand how to upgrade safely. So I would say upgradability issues are a major problem. And then you've got poor treasury permissions as well. So when the fees for the platform are being collected and that ultimately the platform, the way that they make money, that's mishandled to some degree as well. And so again, that's all on chain. And if you don't have the relevant mechanisms to collect the fees or withdraw them, we can sometimes see instances where those funds are stuck effectively with no way to withdraw them. So some contingency planning is certainly something you need to consider with that. Then there's, of course, Oracle assumptions. So if you're tying your rewards to the price of a property index or for whatever reason, typically that's handled off chain. So you basically go and get the price of that property or whatever the token's representing, and then bring it on chain before someone makes a withdrawal. Sometimes that introduces a lot of, I would say, unexpected vulnerabilities, in the sense that the value is not fairly represented. And so the users claiming or having a share of their of the property or the platform don't typically get the real world value. So I'd say oracles are also another risk and vulnerability we see. And then of course you've got the classic re-entrancy attacks that are a result of millions and millions of dollars worth of funds being stolen. And then last but not least is probably weak key management. And so admins that have got control over your system, which they will have, sometimes with the aid of AI, expose their keys to the internet. And then of course you see it's pretty easy for an attacker to go and grab your keys and just drain your treasury or drain someone's funds. And even so, you need to be very cautious of where you store your private keys. And there's ultimately, in this case, multiple keys. So yeah, key management mismatch is a big one, I would say. And yeah, they're not necessarily, like the aforementioned, are not advanced exploits. I'll be honest with you, they're very basic, but weak design and poor testing just bring them out.
Is 100% security achievable? Because all those risks sound quite scary, especially for non-tech savvy investors who prefer, off-chain investments. Those risks might sound something, sound scary and like something new and unknown to them. So is this security upgradable and 100% security is achievable, or there always are some vulnerabilities in the design?
Yeah, that's a great question. So coming back to what we talked about earlier about, well, in this question, actually, so the upgradable issue is probably something that you should address fairly quickly. And so once you finish with the production of everything before it goes live, you should 100% be rigorously testing your upgradability patterns, because that is most likely, firstly, going to be your first wall of defense against an issue. And secondly, it's going to be used in instances of incident response. So if you get something happen in production, and no one makes any promises, you're dealing with a live production grade application which is exposed to the internet, you'd want to have those aforementioned methods in place and ironed out firstly. And then secondly, I would say nothing is 100% secure, for sure. But if you don't go and get a reputable audit done, and if you don't adhere to best practices, your chances of something happening certainly increase. So yeah, I think there's an ongoing security monitoring element with anything really. But if you followed best practices and you have gone out of your way to make sure that your system is secure, then you do minimize the chances of something, you know, happening effectively to your system. And that goes across everything, right? That goes across the smart contracts up into the off-chain element as well.
Thanks, really great answer. And one more question here, follow-up question. So are those smart contract related risks comparable to the human error in, you know, traditional finance, traditional investments?
Yes and no. They're not in their own world as much as people like to think. In this instance, when it comes to tokenization, they complement, like the off-chain logic and the on-chain logic complement each other. And so you're dealing with traditional programming languages, but smart contracts typically introduce more nuanced vulnerabilities and bugs, more so than I would say the traditional Web 2, but there is some crossover. So that's a good thing, that you can sort of you know, allocate where that may or may not happen in terms of the specific what's exposed specifically. But yeah, there's always going to be an element of human error when it comes to building anything, and particular with smart contracts, because a lot of the time, you know, it's sensitive, it's immutable, and if it's not immutable, it needs to be upgradable, but that obviously introduces some complexities. So I hope that's answered your question. I'm not sure. It's a bit of a difficult one to answer, really, because you kind of have to acknowledge that there's going to be human error on both sides. But I think if you take a standardized human error on the Web 2 side of things and apply it to the blockchain, you're more at risk, put it that way.
I got you. I was trying to think like an investor, you know, choosing between invest in RWA token or invest in a traditional security, where more problems can arise, in a technology advanced solution or a traditional solution.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's ultimately about where the technical logic sits in relation to how it affects investors, because some of it, you know, some systems can be compromised, but the investors won't be affected. And so I think it might be a good idea to read detailed white papers of projects. That would probably be the best angle for them.
Got you. And how do we decide between fully on-chain or maybe a hybrid model? On-chain plus off-chain solutions where some parts of the process are still handled off-chain?
Yeah, sure. That's a good question. I think so from a technical perspective, no serious project is fully on-chain. From an investor perspective, I would also try and steer away from something that is fully autonomous on-chain. Again, look, this is not financial advice. Of course, you can do what you like, but typically speaking, those that tend to be drawn to fully on-chain ecosystems are typically DeFi investors. And so they are already, in most places, aligned with what they should be expecting and how to treat those investments. Whereas tokenization is pretty much the TradeFi world coming onto the blockchain. And so I would, in both instances, be leaning towards a hybrid model where enforcement comes from the smart contract, but governance, legal, compliance, everything is verified all off chain, basically. That would be my response.
Amazing, thanks. So what realistically drives the cost of building a tokenization platform? So we are speaking the platform like potentially for multi-issuers and the platform where investors and issuers can interact. What are the typical cost ranges of developing such solution?
Yeah, okay. So the answer basically varies. It's ultimately dependent on regulatory scope, security requirements, other integrations. and operational complexity. Basically, the smart contracts are only just one part. So the real cost often comes from compliance layers, reporting, KYC flows, treasury controls, and probably also secure back-end infrastructure. And then, of course, on top of that, you need to consider, what it is that you're tokenizing. Are you tokenizing one asset? Are you tokenizing a multitude of assets? Because that would determine how costly the platform effectively is. And then, of course, one further instance to consider is, are your tokens, or are the tokens that you're investing in, are they going to be used as collateral elsewhere? And so more often than not, if that's the case, then additional complexity is needed to build the bridge basically to allow that to happen. And so those are some of the factors that would probably drive the costs. And again, it could be that you've got a standalone platform that's got you can facilitate the multitude of assets for investors, and then you've also got the SaaS element as well, right? You can build it into a SaaS where you have an option of complexity, and that effectively would vary in cost as well, dependent on what it is that you're looking to deploy and the complexity thereof.
Where do projects usually underestimate this complexity you're talking about, or the timelines?
Yeah, good question. So more often than not, everybody wants something now. And in my experience of building multiple things and working with lots of different teams, always on the commercial side, it's when this, when that. And I think there's a lack of translation between the technical and the commercial side. And more often than not, I think legal understands this, but the founders don't quite. And so there's quite a lot of complexity and systems and architecture that you need to build in order for this to be production ready. And so to answer your question, I think it is ultimately translating that into how that works from a high level or in the commercial sense. And that's just an educational piece. It's difficult to manage it ultimately, but we have built projects like this that have ranged from 2 to 3 months, possibly even longer. And so it just really depends on the complexity and what you're trying to achieve ultimately. And some platforms are more simple than others. A real estate tokenization platform versus a multitude of tokenization opportunities for investors that you would like to build. That's a different ball game altogether. And I could use several other instances, but yeah, it just really depends on what it is you're looking to offer people. And I guess in the sense of the latter, that might increase the amount of regulatory work required. And so that costs more, that takes more time.
What kind of features actually can trigger that regulatory risk?
Yeah, a multitude of assets, different types of assets. Are they yield-bearing assets as well? If you're issuing tokens that represent an annuity, for example, I'll just use that as an example because I know it's a very common term in the pensions and investment world. But if you're issuing a token that's annuity-like and it produces yield, those definitely will increase the regulatory scope. And likewise, as mentioned earlier, if your token's going to be provided to a DeFi platform externally, so that's integrated as collateral to take out a loan or another position, that again is another layer of complexity as far as regulatory scope is concerned. So those are just some examples. There's probably a significant amount more actually, because a lot of the time, or what we're seeing now, is these tokenized platforms offering those services to investors. So now investors can use that token, put it into a DeFi platform and get a completely different token in return. And then all of a sudden you've got a much wider ecosystem at play here. And the regulators don't care about that, right? They want to see end-to-end stuff. So they'll want to know what it is that you're integrating with, and has that been audited, and how is that built? And so that again is another issue when it comes to complexity and costs and time. And so these are all things that you need to certainly consider.
So that kind of reinforces where legal expertise is required in the entire process. In your experience, how does working with the legal team improves the final product, the final platform, or generally the project?
Yeah, I would say I know we mentioned earlier about legal and tech being working together fairly early on, but I would say the legal part is probably the most important part, to be honest with you. Especially like from the very beginning, you need to speak to a legal team that's competent enough to understand a multitude of things: where you're going to be registered, what vehicle it's in, what jurisdictions you're going to be in. All of these things, you 100% are. If you're not engaged in a legal team, you're at risk of exposing yourself to the regulator in a multitude of ways, most likely that you're probably not even foreseeing. So working with a legal team early on is essential. In fact, it's pretty much mandatory, unless, of course, don't get me wrong, a lot of these platforms are launched by CEOs that you just won't know. They don't have identities, they have aliases. There's lots of very famous DeFi protocols that are set up just like that, right? And that's absolutely fine if you want to go down that route. But if you're talking tokenization and you want to do this properly and officially, you need to speak to a legal team straight away.
Great. I feel more valuable now. So where do you see the biggest evolution in tokenization infrastructure over the coming years?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. At the moment, a lot of the legacy TradeFi companies are tokenizing. JP Morgan, some bigger banks, they've all started to tokenize their platforms and their products already. And I would say the move from simple token issuance to full operational infrastructure, compliance native systems and regulatory secondary markets is probably where it's going to go. Automated reporting, institutional grade settlements. It's moving to, I would say it's moving more from experimental to infrastructure as we speak. And I'd say that's going to be the direction of things within the next, 5 years, I would say. And then you will start to see, as mentioned a moment ago, the collateral based real estate or tokenized tokens that are going to be used. You're going to see that a lot as well. I think it's going to be a wider adoption from an off-chain element, and then on-chain it's going to be integrated with the wider DeFi ecosystem. Yeah, that's where I see things going. And then it might be that we start to see AI agents complete a lot of that stuff as well, which is a little bit more of a concern. But there are tokenized standards up and coming now where AI agents are basically doing that.
Yeah, that was my next question. How do you foresee AI reshaping this whole industry?
Yeah, AI is already, as far as Ethereum requests for comments are concerned, yeah, there's standards that are up and coming, even live on GitHub today, that you can see where AI agents are taking a lead when it comes to pioneering this movement, but also they are acting in a very autonomous way as far as your permissions are concerned. So they have access to wallets, they can make payments, they can conduct on-chain activity. It's getting quite serious.
What types of projects are best positioned to succeed in this space?
This is going to sound like a cliche answer, but there's the problem solving products and teams that are going to succeed. Those that are trying to, tokenization has become a little bit of a buzzword, and so and the same goes with general code development and AI. Not everybody needs AI and not everybody needs blockchain, but if your customers need it, then that's where you're going to succeed. And so in private credit, real estate, treasury products, funds, regulated financial products, unit trusts, all of these things, the list could go on. If it has a place on the blockchain, and as far as your investors and customers are concerned, then I believe that it will succeed. So and I don't think it's just, teams won't succeed if they just jump on the bandwagon. I think a lot of that is happening, but I don't see the longevity in it.
Got you. And let's finalize with this question. If a client comes to you with an idea for tokenization, what are the first 3 things they should validate before building anything?
Yeah, they need to understand what it is they're actually building from a legal perspective. That's the first thing. And I think that ties into what we said earlier about engaging a legal firm to understand what it is you're actually building. And then can these legal rules, if you like, be enforced technically and on chain? And then I would say equally as important is their economic viability. Does it make commercial and structural sense to deploy, basically? Those are I would say that's the top 3 things to consider if someone's looking to build something like this.
100% agree with you. Okay, thanks, Joe, for your professional advice here, for your knowledge. Hopefully that will be helpful for developers, for builders, for those asset managers who are looking to tokenize, those who are more experienced or just entering the sector. Those questions you clarified for us was super valuable, and hopefully we'll meet again on a similar format where we can extract more knowledge and share that with the world, and just
absolutely, yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, let's see more and more projects succeed in this space, and hopefully this will all just shape the future of finance in a better way.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, Joe, we'll be wrapping up, and thanks everyone for watching. Take care.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.